webinar. Just a couple of reminders. Today's webinar is focused on NLG Tech Task Force, specifically new research and tools for education in emergencies. In terms of participation and the follow-up, a couple of things to note. You're welcome to post your questions. In fact, we encourage you to post your questions in the chat window throughout the presentation. We have allocated about 15-20 minutes towards the end of the presentation for the moderated Q&A, and we'll get to as many questions as possible. Do note that there will be a recording of the webinar along with the resources that we're sharing during the presentation, and they will be posted on NetHope Solutions Center, and we'll share that with all of you, and we encourage you to share that with your networks. And as you close out the webinar window, there will be a poll, satisfaction poll for you to fill out and really share with us your feedback on this specific webinar. Now, I'm thrilled to move into the featured presentation for this morning, and first I will kick us off with a brief introduction from the NLG Tech Task Force. Since we have a number of new participants this morning, just a quick overview of the task force. Task Force is designed to facilitate collaboration between the humanitarian sector and the private sector and also academic institutions. You see a number of them featured on this slide, and the focus is on tech-enabled programs for conflict-affected children and youth. Our specific focus is the needs of children and youth affected by the Syrian and Iraqi crisis, including education, employment, participation, and protection. The task force is open to all global and local NGOs and UN agencies, private sector companies, academic institutions, entrepreneurs, and host governments. And we've had, over the past year, over 50 organizations join the task force. And Seth will be sharing the links for where you can find more information about the task force and how to join the task force so you can get invitations to future webinars, events, and opportunities. The first phase of the engagement is underway. We are building this cross-sector community through information exchange, like webinars like this one. On the existing programs and tech solutions, we're sharing past and current efforts, and we're initiating new collaborations in order to achieve a greater impact and reach. And to that point, as I mentioned on the last call, which was March 7th, we're working on a number of NLG Tech Task Force projects. There is a blog post that Seth will be sharing that describes the approach. We have a number of private sector companies involved in co-creating solutions, companies like Microsoft, Salesforce, Adobe, and Pluralsight, and also a number of humanitarian agencies that are incubating these projects on behalf of all of NLG, so including UNICEF, Mercy Corps, and the Norwegian Refugee Council. On this slide, you see some of the topics that are covered in that blog post. Please take a look and let us know if you have any questions or if you are interested in getting involved in the future project. Now, before we get to the feature presentation, and since we are focusing today on the latest research, I do want to call your attention to another excellent research that was presented at the summit, and also let you know that we will have, INEE will be hosting a webinar on April 12th to go into more details on that research, and Luke, who I believe is attending this call, will be presenting. What we just wanted to make sure is that you're aware of this research, and there's a presentation that is available to you that's posted on the NLG Tech Summit website, and then I encourage you to take a look at it. It's fantastic. Now, On this webinar, I'm excited to bring to you some of the latest research and tools for education in emergencies. So like programs that we've been talking about for the past 12 months, research and tools are critical for doing good better. And Tim Unwin, who's the UNESCO Chair in ICT 4D, will share the findings from the Future of Learning and Technology in Deprived Contexts report that was commissioned by Save the Children International. After Tim, Peter Transburg, Senior Communications Coordinator at INEE, will introduce the new ICT Inventory for education in emergencies. And again, encourage you to post your questions in the chat window, and we'll come back to them about 15-20 minutes prior to the end of the webinar. Now I'm thrilled to pass the ball over to Tim.
Thank you very much indeed, Leila, and welcome, hello everyone, whatever time, wherever you are. It's great to be here and to share some of the work that we did for SAVE. This was with Mark Webber, Megan Brugger, and David Hollow. I have a lot of input from SAVE themselves. It doesn't exclusively focus on refugee context and emergencies. But I want to give some of the background to the report, some of the things we did, and then in the last slide show that details on what the core focus of this session is. So what they've asked us to do was actually to look forward. And I think referring to Luke and Michelle's work, they were doing a kind of systematic review of existing material. I'll say a little bit about that at the end, because it's important to see these together. So we were asked to look at where might technology be used in primary level learning, low-income, crisis-affected locations, and what was the impact likely to be of how ICTs are going to change in context of deprivation. So refugees, emergencies were just one part of this report, but an important part. And we were particularly focusing on this notion of marginalization and deprivation, and these two pictures, in a sense, try and summarize that, the Kelabit Highlands in Sarawak, so really isolated places, and these Afghan refugee children in Pakistan. So the report wasn't talking about all the wonderful things that are going to happen in rich countries of the world, but very, very much focusing on, in 10 years' time, how is technology going to be used to support the poorest and the most marginalized? And any of you who know some of our previous work will know that we're a little skeptical of what the impact of that would be. So very briefly, this was based on some literature reviews, but because it was looking to the future, we wanted to engage practitioners, academics, interviews, and then consultations with Save the Children staff as well to draw in their experiences. We also use mind mapping exercises to try and pull the ideas together. You can't see the details of that, but it just shows you sort of the way we went about it. And each of the green pluses have a huge amount of other material, but all of that is available, and I'm happy to share it in the future. And it was also, we went through a validation process of our conclusions with SAVE staff, and basically on that slide, the darker the colors, the more they agreed with what we were saying. So this particular set of questions on low-income areas, crisis-affected areas, most SAVE staff we spoke with were reasonably happy. It's always nice to see zeros at the lowest score level. So if we begin with sort of the overview of the future of technology for learning, I think these were the main conclusions we came up with. The way we went about it was to explore how learning's like to change, what technologies to change, and then bring them together. But the sort of, I don't think there's anything particularly new or rocket science about this. There's going to be more divergence, greater inequality. We think school systems are undoubtedly going to encourage greater use of technology, but actually what that's going to mean needs to be disaggregated and thought through. The role of teachers was interesting. I said it when I embarked on this process, and having chatted with lots of people in the field, I thought our conclusion was going to be, we will have robo-teachers everywhere, AI is going to take over, and nobody will want to value the role of teachers anymore. So we were actually delighted that almost everybody placed emphasis on teaching and teachers, albeit that role will change, and something that we've been working on for 20 years or more is actually the need to ensure that teachers are able to use technology effectively. In the vast majority of schools in the world, that doesn't happen now, and I actually don't see it likely to change in the most deprived context over the next decade. But there will be different combinations of content devices. We see that the digitization of assessment, the use of data analytics for individualized learning is going to become more prominent. Then I think something that came through perhaps more strongly than we were originally expecting is actually the role of parents and communities in helping children gain learning experiences is going to get much stronger rather than less. And I think that has important ramifications for emergency contexts as well. Excuse me. In the low-income peripheral areas, again, not particularly with crisis situations and emergencies, but our overall context was that, and I'm sure this is right, the most isolated areas are going to remain pretty isolated. The role of technology is about increasing inequality. It's not about bringing the two together. And so in the most marginalized areas, those 60% of African primary schools don't have electricity at the moment. So actually developing reliable digital solutions is kind of easy. That will get better. But if you think about the Broadband Commission's latest predictions for this time period, they're still talking about maybe only 35–40% of least developed countries having access in them to digital connectivity. So the context is these marginalized areas are going to remain marginalized, and we have to therefore develop innovative solutions, and there is much greater diversity of those innovative solutions now available, and we could talk about some of those subsequently in the discussion if you wish. And we felt, and there's a lot of support for the idea that sharing devices is going to be increasingly important. That already happens. This trend will continue. We think, and again, there's a lot of debate around the kind of telecenter model, which is widely criticized. But one of the findings that again was a little surprising was that people felt in the most marginal areas they can still play a role. And going back to the Kelabit Highlands in Sarawak, for example, the government is just rolling out in very, very isolated villages with solar power providing electricity, a series of these digital multi-purpose hubs. It's interesting to see that they're not actually very widely used at the moment, but they offer a potential to be used effectively for enhancing learning, lifelong learning, not just for children. There are many solutions for delivering digital learning offline, and so the work that's already been done on caching online content, and I could go into this in more detail if you like, is going up, I'm sure, to be much more significant. But these, the hubs and the caching is a short-term, medium-term process whereby if in 10 years' time it is possible to get connectivity, that will disappear. But it's very important for that interim period. And an exciting aspect is going to be much more non-formal and informal learning amongst people of all ages in these contexts. I've gone through those very quickly because the purpose of today's discussion is really around crisis-affected areas, emergencies, and this was a relatively small part, but an important part of our work. And these are the sort of two broad areas that we looked at: the short-term acute crises and long-term protracted crises. And I think there's a lot of fairly good work already in place on long-term crises, but we can all do much more on the short-term acute crises. I think that NetHope initiatives around this and the coalition are very important. So, and again, one of the challenges they placed on us was keeping the report very short. So it is high-level stuff. but I can talk about more detail should you wish afterwards. So 4 sort of key things that people we spoke with thought were likely to happen in terms of over the next 5 to 10 years in short-term crises. It's to use an obvious word, it is a no-brainer that for mobile people, mobile communication, information gathering are going to be really important. But that has a whole load of implications with it. We were looking at a report of both the positives and the negatives, and I think it's essential that we do that. But there is a lot of good literature now available about the ways in which actually mobile devices can be used for tracking refugees. That's good and bad. The data that's in that, and the way that mobiles are also used to harass and abuse refugees and forced migration and in other circumstances. So a lot of these are two-edged. We think that an area where a lot of opportunity is likely to be developed, and an area where there is some evidence at the moment, is the use of digital online and offline solutions for the trauma and psychosocial counselling of children in refugee contexts. It's sadly clear that there aren't enough counsellors around to support the desperate situations that young refugees find themselves in. But there's quite a lot of evidence in particularly many of the richer countries of the world that digital solutions, offline solutions, are one way of providing some support. So I think this is something that a lot of new work could usefully go into. Thirdly, and again, these are looking forward ideas. I think it's pretty reasonable to conclude that there's going to be much greater content in local languages that can be used in crises contexts. But people have to set about developing that, and I think providing learning resources in the biggest sense, not just traditional education, but learning how to survive in particularly different kinds of harsh environments, learning basic words in other languages. There's a huge diversity, and we drill down into that a little bit. And then a fourth solution that most people thought has to be done, and whether it's how long it's going to take to develop these is a matter of debate. But already there are traditional schools-in-a-box solutions. People are beginning to experiment with digital ones. But the opportunity to have, if you like, a stockpile of schools-in-a-box with digital resources, solar and connectivity, to enable children to not lose out on the education that they previously may have had. And I think another thing, though, that we need to recognize here is that many children have been outside the formal education system for months, sometimes years, even before they become refugees. So developing these solutions, I think, is a really exciting opportunity. And then in the longer term, protracted crises, particularly in camps, again, there are two main conclusions that came out of this idea of the digital learning hubs, which already exist, but only for a relatively small number of people. Much more work can go into that. And we particularly explored this idea of hybrid cultures of learning. Certainly a lot of evidence suggesting that many refugees go with the expectation of coming back, so they need to retain an ability to learn around their curriculum in their own countries and the languages in which that curriculum taught. But also, host countries very often expect them to integrate with the curriculum and the languages there. So the idea of hybridity, of learning opportunities amongst refugee children is a very important one, and developing resources that can help deliver that. There are huge risks, though, in all this, and I think generally some of the work we're doing for other agencies on the use of technology in education, um, you can't see my face. I'm smiling as I think how to put this. But let's just say that I feel far too much emphasis is being placed on the positive benefits with insufficient on the risks. And we just highlight 3 risks here. The child online safety ones, that's very familiar. Program risks for any NGO, international agency working in this are also very, very important. You know, take one simple question. How many ICT for development, educational, particularly in refugee context, have you seen where there's a proper evaluation of the financial inputs and how the budget has been managed? There's very little of that out there, and that needs to be tied up. Most are unsustainable. Most initiatives at the moment, they need to be ways need to be found to resources. And actually, and this is where Luke's paper is interesting as well. I mean, even that concludes that we don't really always know what works for the most marginalized. So there are a lot of issues around there, and many of these reports tend to use different methodologies and so on. So we need to have a lot more effective monitoring and evaluation. So those are some of the risks. I think in more recent work we've been doing, the work we did to SAVE here was about 6 months ago. More recent work, there's growing evidence that actually says, well, actually maybe technology in education does not improve learning outcomes. And I think we have to think very carefully around that as well. So let me draw to some conclusions. I think this was one comment that I wanted to put here. I think there's far too often deprived children in communities are used by as laboratories for experimentation by academics, companies, civil society organizations, be it for greater profit or for acclaim of the organization. We need to be very, very, very careful that we're not using these most marginalized, underprivileged people in communities as experiments. I think there's a huge amount that tends to be done on that, and it raises difficult ethical questions. So, you know, Luke and Michelle can say much more about their report, but it's important to realize that we did this forward look overview, and this paper that has been mentioned at the beginning is based on a systematic review. Some people like systematic reviews, others are a little less convinced by them, but we could put that aside. And I think many of their conclusions were very similar to ours, but obviously they had an opportunity to write a much longer paper and drill down on review of the literature. But I just highlight, Luke, I know if you're there that these aren't all of them, but the close parallels of the EdTech alone isn't going to solve things. It's got to be locally relevant. Adult teachers, facilitators, key for providing a structure for learning. Teachers crucial, and this point again that infrastructure is a major barrier. So it was really good to see that there were synergies in what we were doing. So Layla had asked some calls for action. This is, I think, the penultimate slide. I just highlight here. And something we certainly came across is there's far too much interagency conflict rather than collaboration. The call for action is we all need to work together, put our own prestige and our own silos aside, because there is far too much wasted duplication, and we can do things much better for the poorest and most marginalized than we're doing already. I think we need always to focus in everything we do on the learning needs of the communities we're trying to support, not on just trying to try out a new bit of technology to see if it will work. Identify the learning needs and then identify the technology that will support those. And also this idea of putting in place infrastructure for rapid response solutions. We don't have enough in that space yet. So those were 3 calls for actions. Let me just repeat them. Greater interagency collaboration, a focus on learning needs and outcomes for the most marginalized, and the need for a rapid response situation. So to conclude, and just trying to keep this simple in brevity in terms of time, we have absolutely no doubt, and I don't think anyone should, that there will remain immense diversity and inequalities. I come back to the point I made that the use of technology in education is going to lead to greater inequality rather than less, unless we do something about it. And the issues around access, use of ICTs, infrastructure, electricity, connectivity, all important. Really drawing on the more recent work we've been doing for another agency, more and more convinced that we need to have a fundamental rethinking of vision for education over the period ahead. If you've looked at the recent UNESCO statistics figures, it basically shows we're 3 years into the SDGs and there's been no change on the educational targets. We're still failing dismally. And the third concluding point, yes, lots of exciting technological innovation out there, but this is so important we cannot afford for it to be technology-led. So I hope I've been a little bit provocative, but that's tried to find a brief summary of what we were doing, and happy to answer lots of questions later. And I would now like to hand the
Thank you, Tim.
presentation over to Peter.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tim. And so while Peter is getting connected, here we go. Excellent. So just a quick reminder, continue posting your questions in the chat window. We'll get to them after Peter's presentation. And now, now that we've heard some of the insights from what we can expect in 2020 or 2025, what we need to be working towards, Peter will actually share more about the work that INEE is doing today to support all of us who are doing education, supporting education in emergencies, and specifically with the new tool that's available to all of you, and that is ICT Inventory. Over to you, Peter.
Great, yes, thanks. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Leila. Thanks, Tim. Thanks to the NLG Tech Task Force as well for hosting the webinar. We're very excited. My name is Peter Transburg, and I'm Senior Communications Coordinator at INEE, which is the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies. I'm excited to present and to show you all a brand new tool that was developed by INEE. In fact, this new website that I'll be showing you is not officially launching until next Tuesday, March 20th, so you can definitely consider this a sneak preview of the tool. But first, a little background for those of you who don't know. INEE is an open global network that promotes access to quality, safe, and relevant information for all people affected by crisis, and that's crisis of any kind. INEE is a flexible network with very minimal formal structure, shared leadership, non-competitive, free membership. It's with very strong interagency collaborative partnerships. There are about 14,000 INEE members around the world right now, and of course hundreds of organizational partners, including some very big and familiar names like UNICEF and Save the Children, Norwegian Refugee Council, and Mercy Corps, and UNHCR, and of course many, many other organizations working on the front lines of humanitarian response all around the world. And for all of these operational partners and members of the network, INEE plays a very facilitative role that includes community building, convening, knowledge management, and advocacy. Those are our functions, and those are the things that we do as a network. I encourage you to find out more and to join the network. It's free, and you can do that at ineesite.org. One of the active network spaces within INEE is the INEE Technology and Education in Crises Task Team, or the Tech Task Team as we call it. The Tech Task Team is a global group of nonprofit, academic, philanthropic, private sector experts who are focused on the use of technology to enhance educational opportunities, very specifically in emergency contexts. The INEE Tech Task Team is similar in its focus to the NLG Tech Task Force, which has a very similar name as well, but the membership of the INEE Tech Task Team is individual, it's not institutional. And the Tech Task Team has a fully global focus and incorporates all forms of crises. We partner very closely with the NLG Tech Task Force, and we're very glad to piggyback on the really great work that they're doing. The Tech Task Team, the INEE Tech Task Team, acknowledges that technology alone can't solve all problems, but the team is certainly founded on the idea that technology can play a revolutionary role in supporting good teaching and quality learning, even and especially in crisis contexts. Certainly, technology faces very tough conditions and tough tests in contexts of conflict and disaster, where infrastructure is minimal, where learners and teachers are on the move. But this is also where the greatest impact of technology can be realized, and the group is inspired by that. You can certainly find out more about the INEE Tech Task Team at the link on the screen, and I think it's being shared as well in the chat. But I will point out that the task team has 3 objectives. 1, to share knowledge and information, pretty broad. 2, to maintain the quote-unquote ICT for education and emergency landscape. And 3, to elevate the experience of people working on the ground. And one of the task team's current activities fits under all 3 of these objectives, and that's what I'm presenting to you today. The INEE Tech Task Team is very pleased to announce the launch of the ICT Inventory for Education and Emergencies. Just switch to the next slide there. The ICT Inventory, as I'll refer to it for short, which, as I mentioned, will only be officially launched next week, is an interactive online database of technology resources for delivering quality education in emergencies. The goal of the ICT Inventory is to make it easy to find useful tools that are or can be used to deliver education, as well as projects where education technology is used in crisis contexts. So while there are other education and EdTech portals out there, the ICT Inventory fills a gap with its very specific focus on education and emergencies. And we feel that it has a pretty unique nature to it, in that it's crowdsourced. The site is very responsive and interactive in its design, and there's a very comprehensive categorization structure. This website is designed for use primarily by educators and education and emergencies providers, as well as education technology developers. And we imagine it will also be very useful to a whole range of other people, students, certainly researchers, donors, and maybe many others. So before I move into the demo, which I'm excited to get to, I will say another few quick words about the 2 types of content that are in this database, and those are tools and projects. We tried to keep the types of content very, very simple, and those are the 2 that we host within this database. So very, very generically, we define a tool as any hardware or software that facilitates learning and increases the ability to deliver and access quality education. So tools may include devices, software, platforms, systems, equipment, and a whole range of other implements. Tools are things like tablets and devices, mobile learning apps, communications platforms, data collection tools, among other things. So there are certainly many examples, and you'll find those in the database. We define projects as any, very, very generically, any planned effort designed to provide education. That's a pretty general definition, but that's what we go with. So projects may include both short-term, long-term interventions, maybe collaborative or solitary endeavors. Projects in the ICT Inventory are often, but not always, linked to tools that are also in the database. And you can think of projects, and we like to think of projects as case studies of real-life uses of technology for education in emergencies. And of course, depending on the results of the project or on your point of view, the case studies can certainly be examples of good practice, or they can be cautionary tales of lessons learned. Either way, we hope that they're exemplary and that they provide a glimpse at what's happening. Some of the projects that are already in the database include things like the use of digital games for teaching and learning, blended and online higher education programs, the provision of offline internet in remote or disaster areas, teacher professional development, and remote coaching via mobile phones, and certainly a lot more. The ICT inventory is, we like to think of it as an up-to-date reflection, or a landscape, if you will, of work that is being done by a very extensive network of people, organizations, governments, and even corporations focused on supporting teaching and learning in crisis contexts. So among that very extensive network of people and organizations is you, and this is where you come in. We invite you to use and share and contribute to the website. It really is a crowdsourced endeavor that gets better with more use and with more users. So what I mean by crowdsourced is certainly is that anyone who registers on the site, and that is 100% free, can upload content, and anyone can rate and comment on the tools and projects in the system. We expect to have tools and projects uploaded by users on an ongoing basis from all over the world. We will, of course, gently manage the crowdsourcing with a bit of light touch of expert vetting, which is to say that all the content uploaded by users will go through a review process by a team of content managers from the INEE Tech Task Team. Of course, the team will be there and help flag and, of course, remove any inappropriate contributions, but the main task will be to ensure basically that the content included in the ICT inventory is, 1, relevant to the field of education and emergencies, 2, described at least in enough detail for users to make sense of it, and then 3, of course, to make sure that the content is accurate about any particular project or tool. So contributing to the website will definitely help bridge the knowledge gap between beneficiaries, learners, educators, developers, aid workers, funders, hopefully researchers, who are trying, of course, to maximize limited resources in the face of humanitarian crisis. So we thank you in advance for your contributions, and we expect that all of you working on tools and projects will be active on the website. So without further ado, why don't I show you a quick look of the ICT inventory. Great. My screen should be shared with you now, and Layla can pop in and let me know if that's not the case.
Looks good. Thank you.
Oh, great. So I'm not going to go into all the details about this new website. That would spoil some of the fun you'll have when you're exploring it. But I do want to point out a handful of the ways that you can interact with the contents of the website. So you can browse and search and filter and comment and register and upload. Those are 6 of the activities you can do, and I'm going to just quickly point those out to you in this little demo and then let you go on your own and explore. So first, you can easily and freely, without being registered, without being logged in, you can easily browse any of the site's contents, and you can see on the home page, you can scroll through. There's a featured set of tools and projects. You can keep up with the latest contents in the recently added section. And of course, you can browse based on dynamically generated lists of projects and tools. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the projects link here. And I'm going to use this to point out the search feature. So within the projects and or tools listings, you can search by keyword. And you can use this little search box over on the right side. The search on this site is powered by Algolia, which generates dynamic search results very, very quickly. So if I type in the word mobile, for instance, you can see that on the results on the left are automatically sorted to display all the projects with this word in them, with the most relevant ones at the top. And you can see that your search term has been made italics within the results themselves. To dig even deeper and for an even more powerful way to find relevant tools and projects on the site, you can use the filters, which are also located here on the right side of the page. To show that, I'm going to move over to the tools listing. So I'm just going to click on tools, which will take me over to the dynamically generated list of tools here. And on the right side, you can see that there's a whole list of all the category groups that we use across the site to organize content. And when you click on the groups of titles, you will see all the categories currently in use across the site, as well as the number of tools that use each of the categories that you see there. I will point out that you don't see all of the categories in each particular group because not all of the categories that are in the system have been used yet. So that's where you come in. When you enter your project or your tool, you'll be labeling that content with one of these or more of these categories, and that will help more of them appear here in these lists. But just for a quick example, let's say you're looking for tools that are currently in operational stage of development. So you're going to click on operations and maintenance because that's where your tool is at. Let's say you're looking only for things that are free. You don't want to pay anything at any time, so you want to click only on the on free. And let's say you're looking for application and services on language learning. So you can see that if I click on language learning here on the right side, it will automatically select that and will sort down and let me know right away that, oh, there are two entries, tools in this case, that are fitting with all the categories that I have now selected. And you can dive even deeper. You can talk about who is the target population. In this case, I might pick refugees to help drill down even further, and maybe I can even target the educational level to be early childhood development or early childhood education. In this case, you can see that I am left now with 2 results within the database that fit all of the terms and fit all of the categories that I've selected. So your results on the left side are dynamically generated and quickly adjusted and displaying you to show really only the tools that meet all of your filter selections. So once you have your results, you can simply click on a tool to find out more about it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Feed the Monster, which is one of the tools listed here based on the results. And you can see all of the things that are listed in the database about this particular tool, including, of course, a narrative description, names of the developers and collaborators, some of the websites, and all the other specifications, including the categories about this tool. You can see the dates, the costs, network requirements, platform requirements, locations where this can or should be used, and so on, including at the very bottom some of the tools limitations. This is a field we added to hopefully help people be honest about the tools and the projects that they've listed, and let them indicate here where some of the limitations might be. In this case, none are known. This brings me to a point that will help, hopefully, you interact in addition to other ways. This will help you interact with some of the content on the website. As you can see, registered users can also rate and leave comments on any of the tools and projects on the website. As long as you're an authenticated user, meaning you're logged in, you can comment and rate. And this, we hope, will help create very helpful feedback loops for all of the users of the site, but of course also for the tools developers and the project managers themselves. And this can be also a place to cite the risks that Tim talked about in his presentation in this comment area. So you can see that I'm not logged in at the moment, so I won't be able to leave a comment and rate, but someone named Peter Transburg, yesterday left a comment here, and you can see how quick and easy it is to do. So, 2 more features for the site. As I mentioned, anyone can register on this site for free. I'm going to go ahead and right corner of the screen, you can see there's a register or login links, and if I click on register, you'll see that this very simple form comes up where I can complete it and fill out just my first name and my last name, an email address, and a password of your choosing. And as soon as you click submit, then a confirmation will be sent to you by email. Click on the link in your email inbox, and you are in. That's it. It's that easy to register on the website. And once you're registered, of course, you can do a lot more, including the comment and rating that I mentioned. I'm going to go ahead and log in as myself, just by clicking on the login link at the top right. Fill out the login credentials, and now I'm in. The last thing, and probably one of the most important ones, of course, that I want to show you to how to interact with the content on this website, of course, is to upload. There's a little link here in the menu bar called Upload. From there, you can choose whether you're going to be uploading a tool or a project. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and click on Project. And you will see that there's a very simple form. with all the details about your tool or your project, and you just fill out the form. Most of the fields are mandatory. We do require quite a bit of information, detailed information about your project or about your tool. Of course, this is where you're going to be selecting all of the different categories related to your project or your tool. And then once you're finished with this form, you just hit submit. It's that easy. That's it. The tech task team will review and activate or upload within a few days. If there's any questions, we of course will reach out to you as the uploader to help us fill out any gaps that exist in your entry. But that is it. So without going into it any further, I will let you take the time to explore and register, and please do contribute. So that's it for me today. I hope we'll have some discussion, and I'm happy to hear your comments and feedback. You are welcome to start using the ICT inventory already, but just so you know, and reminder, March 20th is when we'll be launching it officially, and at that point, you'll see more communications from INEE and our partners about it, and we certainly encourage you to share it widely with your networks and with your colleagues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you, Tim. As just a quick summary, what you heard in the first, 45 minutes of this call is about the research on the future of basic education, including what role technology might have in deprived context. And then also you had the opportunity to see a preview of an interactive online database of resources, technology resources for delivering quality education in all types of emergencies. I do echo what Tim and Peter said, which is that technology is not the solution. It's one of the tools in our toolbox that we need to take time to understand, and also then evaluate what role it can play in humanitarian context. And that's the work that three of us are doing together. So what I'll do right now is start going through a set of questions that you've posted, and feel free to add new questions in the chat window. I'll kick us off with a couple of questions that are addressed to all panelists, or that each one of us might contribute to. So the first question is around Tim's comment about improving collaboration and cooperation, and what suggestions we have for steps that NGOs and governments, and I would also add private sector, entrepreneurs, and affected youth and children could do to improve this. So how do we improve collaboration around education in emergencies? So we can start with Tim and then Peter, and I'm happy to add if they haven't covered everything already.
Yeah, thanks, Leila, and thanks for the question. I'm going to try and answer things very quickly so we can have more questions. I think one, probably the most important, we all need to be more humble and realize that we can learn more from each other than we can probably create ourselves. So we have to change our attitudes away from being very competitive and thinking we do things better than anyone else. Secondly, there's a huge literature on what makes partnerships effective. And instead of talking about partnerships, we should learn from that literature. And I think thirdly, governments have to take a lead on this. I know there is a lot of emphasis on the role of the private sector and NGOs, but I would like to re-empower government. So that was my quick summary. But happy to take that question offline from whoever sent it.
Thank you, Tim. Over to you, Peter. Any additional thoughts?
Thanks, Leila. I did get knocked out there quickly. Came back, but I assume your question is to summarize or to add any additional
The question
thoughts?
was about what we could do to improve collaboration around the topic of education emergencies, and including NGOs and governments and private sector more broadly.
Great. Yeah. Well, I'm going to focus on one that is very central to the very identity of INEE, which of course is that interagency collaboration. And it was great to see Tim's recommendation at the end of his presentation about really increasing that interagency collaboration as opposed to fostering the competition between agencies. And for us, that's obviously fundamental as a network. And if you in your agency or in your work are finding it difficult, I encourage you to join any of the sort of interagency collaboration bodies like INEE, the NLG Tech Task Force, others where you can step into that space, take off your organizational hat, and interact with colleagues from across networks and from across organizations and even industries to further the common goals. So I think there certainly are opportunities, and we encourage that, of course, broadly. Yeah, that's where I'll leave it.
Wonderful. And just two things to add from the task force perspective. I mean, this is why we've set up the task force. Is number one is to have all the right stakeholders at the table. So it starts with just identifying who needs to be involved in collaboration. So this is why I've mentioned, in addition to the NGOs and governments, we have private sector, we have entrepreneurs, we also have conflict-affected youth, and this is specific to the refugee context. The second thing is collaboration is not just about information exchange. Information exchange is a starting point for building trust within the community, but it is about actually co-creating projects and solutions together, and that is something that we're focusing on the task force, is really working together with the different stakeholders to solve very specific problems. And I think Seth has shared a recent blog post to explain the approach. And thank you for this question. So the next question is just fantastic. So many great questions, but this one was one of the really hot topics at the NLG Tech Summit, and something that's top of mind for the work all of us are doing. It's around lifelong and informal learning across demographics. So what do we as a panel think regarding where we're at with regards to lifelong learning, and how we can improve opportunities regarding accreditation of informal and lifelong learning? Peter or Tim, either one of you, if you want to take it first.
we're too modest. Okay, tibia. Let me take. Again, I'll try and three very brief things. I think vocational training of all sorts has always been a Cinderella subject. I think it still is. So we're not doing enough in this key area. Secondly, I think there are some major drivers going on. I'm doing some work on with the ILO, and you should look at all that stuff around the future of work. There are going to be dramatic changes driven by technology, the role of robotics, artificial intelligence, virtual realities, augmented reality. They're going to completely change the nature of the workplace. I think I'm an optimist that yes, lots of people in traditional jobs will be put out of work, but I think new kinds of jobs will be created, so it's positive. But that driver, I think, is going to force us to pay more attention to lifelong learning. And I think thirdly, I don't like this categorization of people to millennials, and my mum, who is in her 90s, is great online. So we have to break down this view that technology is only usable by certain categories. So three just very brief thoughts.
Thank you, Tim. Anything to add, Peter?
I will just say that I think, well, I'm going to put a plug in for the ICT Inventory, of course, but this will hopefully be a place where you can find examples of people and organizations who are doing relevant work to that question. So finding ways to increase the viability of credits and of certifications that people already have, and then ways to validate those. And hopefully we'll be able to list within the inventory some of the projects and some of the efforts that are ongoing in that regard. I think in terms of lifelong learning and or vocational training for those who are displaced, because that's certainly the topic here at hand, there are many groups who are working on that, and I can't think of them all off the top of my head right now, but I would say reach out to those who have been working in this area. I'm thinking of Reboot Camp, who's based in Amman. They've done from the conception of their project, which was to, of course, train refugees on how to code, to the reality of what it is now a few years later, since they've started, has changed quite a lot. And the lessons learned along that way, I think, are very important. So reaching out to the folks who are running programs like this, where they're reaching out to train refugees with relevant life skills and job skills. I think it's not always a straightforward solution and question, so there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. I think reaching out and talking to them is an important step.
So Tim here, I must just say, coding isn't the solution to the world's poverty problems. But
right.
Yep. And to that point, I will just add a couple of things. One is connecting learning to earning, so breaking down the silos between education and economic opportunities, and defining economic opportunities more broadly. We had a fantastic discussion at the NLG Tech Summit about that, and what that means for refugees specifically. There are some jobs in host communities within the approved sectors, but there are other opportunities to earn dignified living, whether it's remote work, impact sourcing, entrepreneurship. Neither one of them is a silver bullet, but we need to consider economic opportunities more broadly and work back to connect the skills training and the proof of learning to what the opportunities are. And there's some really great links that are being shared in the chat window that speak to more around the types of skills that we need to be thinking about that need to be developed, whether it's problem solving, entrepreneurial thinking, growth mindset, as well as the role of different stakeholders, so beyond the humanitarian sector, different stakeholders that can support this work. I'm going to quickly run through a few additional questions, and then you all have our email contacts if you'd like to follow up. Peter, just quickly, are all the sample projects vetted and rated before being included?
They are all vetted, but they're not all rated. So yes, there is a light vetting that happens from the team, from the INEE Tech Task Team, so all the content that's uploaded is definitely reviewed word for word, and certainly we help with any recategorization that needs to happen. We will reach out to people who've uploaded in case there's any questions, and then of course it needs to meet the basic content criteria that we look for, and those are all listed on the website when you upload. So they are vetted, but we don't do any of the rating. We're going to let the crowd do the rating and commenting.
Okay, great. And Tim, what would be included in School in a Box?
I don't know whether people are familiar with some of the schools in the box that already exist that have sort of pencils, crayons, textbooks, curriculum, but I think the key things are, some mechanism to allow solar generation of power, and that is getting pretty good now at a relatively reasonable price. Obviously, a means of getting connectivity, and now then there are a whole lot of questions as to what kind of digital devices one might have, but there are a lot of projects working around tablets. Many of them I'm not particularly fond of personally. Many refugees actually have some kind of digital device with them. It's quite remarkable. I haven't got the immediate to hand data, but there are access to resources out there already. But to me, it's the content that's much more important. So it would be content resources in relevant languages for the hybridity of the curricula that people are getting. Somebody going through 3 or 4 countries, which curriculum, how long are you going to spend? Secondly, I think really important to have content around survival advice, basic health advice. You can link that to earning opportunities as well. There's a plethora, and there are some people who are beginning to talk about developing these. So you've got to have electricity, you've got to have connectivity, and you've got to have content. I could talk for hours on this, but
yeah. So we'll follow up if there are any additional questions regarding School in a Box. The only other thing that I would add is connectivity for the future. There was a question about any resources you both might be aware of around child online safety, either guidelines or organizations. So if there are, feel free to post them in the chat window, or we can follow up in our recap email. And we are now at the top of the hour, so I'm going to have to wrap up this excellent discussion. If your question hasn't been answered on this call, as there were so many excellent questions, feel free to follow up with any one of us. Recording of the call and presentations will be available to all of you, and please do share the recording, the reports, and the inventory with your organizations and with your partners. And I'd like to thank Tim and Peter for taking the time to share with us their work and to just remind us of how critical and important research is, and also having a repository of the different tools and programs that all of us could benefit from. So thank you, Tim and Peter, and thank you to all of you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
We're going to keep this window open for a little bit in case anyone would like to just make copies of the various links that have been shared in the chat.